Hey everyone, welcome back. And we are doing a tutorial series where we are discussing how to make Python projects, which can be very useful for your resume. The very first project that we did was Lead Speak, and it was a basic project which was targeted towards beginners. If you need the code for that one, it is in this particular repository. The link for this one is in the description section below. And today we'll be making another project, and for this one I thought we'll be making a zip utility which can help you in zip things. So we'll basically make a command line application which can create a zip folder and basically zip all the files that you give it. So let's get started. All right guys, so we have opened our editor and we have this file named zipster.py. So we'll start making our zip utility now. So this would be a command line application, and our motive here is to accept some command line arguments which would be pretty useful for our program to know what the user actually wants to do. So let's get started now. So as we just discussed in the previous project, the very first line of your Python program will be a shebang. So let's add that. If you want to know what this does, I'll recommend you to go back to the previous video to see what it is exactly and how does it work, right? And apart from that, we are done. So let's import a bunch of things. We'll need the OS package, we'll need the sys package. Since we want to accept the command line arguments and want to parse those from the CLI, we'll need a package known as argparse. It is part of the standard library itself. And what else? I think we would need zip file, and we would also need I guess setlib. All right, so let's get started. So now we'll make the main function our program, and in Python we'll say something as this: if dunder name is equal to the string representation of dunder main, which basically represents that when I run this particular zipster.py file as a standalone module, what should actually execute, right? So whatever I write now in this particular code block, this would be executed if I run it, for example, doing python 3 zipster.py. If, for example, I import this file directly in my other module, so for example, I'm doing from zipster import some of the utility function, anything that is in this particular block won't be executed at all. So that is what dunder name equal to dunder main does, and this is a very basic Python question as well, which can be asked in an interview. So good to know things like those. All right, now that we have discussed that, let's do something here. But before that, let's make utility functions for ourselves so that we can actually zip the file itself. All right, so let's make a utility function, and let's name it as our zip utility. And then what this particular function should do for us is it should accept a zip file name. So whatever the name of the zip file will be, for example, if I name it as myfolder.zip, basically my program and particularly this utility function should get that name and create the actual file for me, actual folder for me, right? So it will accept that, it will accept the paths that are given, and it would also accept the mode. So what we'll do here is we'll be using context manager in Python, and with is one of the context manager that is readily available in the standard library itself. So we'll open up the zip file using this, and let's pass in the zip file name as the first argument, and then the other argument is the mode. And let's now add a file pointer for us to manipulate it. So we'll say this is zip file for us, right? And then let's do like, let's grab the file name So we'll say os.path.base name, and let's give it a path, and let's get that path by iterating over the paths. So we'll say for path and paths, we'll get the name of each of the file that is there, and we'll say the new path is, we can use the dir name, and we can say it should be the path. And now let's also access the current directory. So we'll say os.getCwd. This particular function from the os package itself will give you the current working directory. It is similar to executing the pwd command in the terminal. So if I do pwd here, it will give me where I am. It will give me the present working directory, right? So it is saying that, okay, you are inside users, SIAM, personal, Python projects, right? All right, now let's get back here, and let's change our directory to the new path. Once we are in the new path, what we will be doing is, we'll say the zip file that we have, right? So this one, I'm referencing this one. So we have opened the zip file that we have created, and this is the file pointer. So what we are trying to do here now is, we are saying that we would access that particular pointer, and now we'll execute the write function on that particular pointer. So we want to write to that zip folder that we have just created. We'll say we want to write the file name, and this is the file name that we want to write to our zip folder, and we want to compress it with the zip file dot zip deflated. So this is the compression type that we are giving out, and this would basically compress your file that is inside the file name, right? So what we are essentially doing is, we are taking all the paths, we are iterating over each path, getting the file name from that particular path, right? So we're getting the file name here, and now what we're doing is, we are changing the directory to that particular new path, and then we are writing that particular file, right? This particular file, whatever we have got in the path, and we are mentioning the compressed type, and then we are writing it to our zip folder, right? So this is not a zip file, but let's rename it as a zip folder, right? So that it is more evident to you. Or maybe let's name it as zip archive, right? That would be an appropriate name for it, I guess. Alright, now that we are done, what we need to do is, we need to go back to our current directory, because we were in a particular directory when this program was executing. We went to another working directory where the actual file was, we wrote that particular file. Now we want to go back to our original path, right, where this particular program was executed from, or where this particular utility function was called from. Now what we'll do is, we'll do os.chdir, which is the change directory utility function provided by os package itself, which is part of the standard library. And now we'll pass in the current directory. So now that we have done this, this particular utility function is particularly ready to accept a zip file name, the list of paths, and the mode, and it will do all the trick that you need, right? Alright, so what we'll be doing now is basically making another utility function which can display the details of the archive that we have created. So let's say view archive details, and this should have an archive name. Now what we can do is, we can say our archive is from zipfile.zip file, and let's give the archive name here. Now we have the object for archive, and we can iterate over the info list of the archive. So the way we do that is, we can say for info in archive.info list, and then we can say let's print the information out, right? um, let's use f string and say displaying data for archive, and let's use the archive name here. Let's say we want to have the data for the uncompressed file size, so we'll say uncompressed file size, and our uncompressed file size will be in info.filesize, and these many bytes were there. And now similarly we can do that our compressed file size is info.compress size, and this should do the trick, right? Now let's call this utility function in our main program, right? So the way we do it is, let's test our zip utility, right? So first of all, let's keep this program static, and then we would make it dynamic by introducing CLI arguments and passing them through the CLI and then passing it on to our zip utility function. So let's do the static one first, and the way we will do it is, we'll call the zip utility function, and then we'll say that okay, you need a zip file name, right? So let's say that the file name is myfolder.zip. The paths that it needs, this would be a list of paths, right? So let's give a file name, right? Let's run this utility on the leadspeak file itself, right? So let's give, in the current directory we are looking for leadspeak 1337.py, and this is the only file that our zip archive will have, right? So that is done, and the last info that we need is the mode we want to operate in, right? So we'll just say that we want to operate in the writable mode. We also need to give the keyword argument for this one. So now let's say that we want to call the view archive details, and let's give the name of the archive itself. So we'll say this is my folder.zip, right? And now let's try to run this program, right? So I'll show you, we have nothing here, right? We just have the .py file for the leadspeak project, and then we have the py file for the Zipster project, right? And nothing else apart from that. Now once we run this particular program, it should generate this zip folder, myfolder.zip, containing this particular file, right? That is what we have coded. Okay, seems like it worked. And now it also displayed this particular utility function, right? It displayed the data for myfolder.zip that it created. It said that the uncompressed file size was 445 bytes, and after compression it was 245 bytes. So looks like it worked, but let's verify it, right? We can't trust our program like that. So let's say I want to do ls minus al. So al is the flags that we have used. A is for all, which means it would also display the hidden files. L is for long format, so the display format for this command should be in long format, right? This is what you see, like it gives the permission, whatever, who's the user owning the file, who is the group owning the file, the time that it was modified on, and stuff like that. So if you see here, we have myfolder.zip already created, right? So seems like it did the trick. Let's have a look in the finder. So this is my folder, right? And if I uncompress it, it has this particular file, right? So if I show you, we have got this file, right? This was the exact source code that we compressed. So seems like everything is working fine till now. What I'll do is I'm gonna delete this one, and I'll get rid of this one. And now let's try to accept the command line arguments and basically give user more power to execute our own project, right? So what we'll do is we'll say that this one is okay. So first of all, let's name it as archive name, and we'll say for now it is static. So this should be my folder.zip. So we can pass on this archive name in here, and we can pass on this archive name here as well. One thing that we want to do is, instead of file name, we can use the archive name itself, because altogether this is an archive, right? So let's rename it as archive name. Once we have done that, let's try to introduce the command line arguments. So what we'll do is we'll define a parser for it. So let's do it here. We'll use the argparse package, which is part of the standard library. So we'll say argparse.argument parser, and then let's give it a description, and let's say this is a Zipster zip CLI utility, right? So now that we have the parcel object, we can add arguments to it so that we can accept it from the command line itself. So we can say it like parser dot add argument, and then we can say we want to give the name of the zip file itself. So let's name it as -z, or maybe we can also call it -zip archive, right? And we want to give a destination for it. So let's say the destination will be archive name, and then we define an action. So the action will be stored, because we want to store whatever comes in as this command line argument in this particular variable, right? It's not a variable technically, but it's an attribute to the object itself. So once we access this particular attribute, we want that the particular information, whatever is provided with this command line flag, should be passed on to us, so that we can use it as our archive name. Instead of my folder.zip, we'll be using whatever is supplied by the user who is running our application. So now we can also do one thing. This is what most of the people forget, is basically having a help statement, right? So we can say that, okay, if the user executes our program and do a -h, it should print that, okay, these are the help arguments, right? It should define how the program is supposed to run. So we'll do like, let's say this is the zip archive name for the archive created, and right, so we have this one, and what we want is we want to have another argument which should be all the files that we want to do. Remember the paths argument that our utility function had? So we want something to give to our paths, right? So let's say this is defined by files, and we don't need this, and let's say this is an args of star, which basically means that this particular file flag can accept multiple arguments, right? So these can be multiple files. After that, we will say that, okay, where do we want to store it, right? So we'll say that the action will be stored, and we don't really need it. We'll be able to access it directly. So let's take help and modify it. List of paths of files that are to be included in zip archive, right? And let's also add another flag, and this one can be used for viewing the information. So let's make the viewing information kind of optional, right? So if the user doesn't want the details, like what happened, what was the uncompressed size, what was the compressed size, we will give that information optionally to the user. So what we'll do here is we'll say that I want to have this argument as -v, and let's define view here. Let's get rid of this. Let's do destination should be view. Action should be, instead of store, it should be store true. And what else? I think we can have a default as false, which means until and unless this particular flag is included, we won't display this information at all, right? And after we are done with this, we can say that we can just print a line that zip archive has been created, and We can have archive name here, make it an f string. Now come back here. Now there's one more thing that we can do. We can, but let's do it afterwards. Let's try to run our program this much, and once we're comfortable with it, we can go one more step further, right? So let's rename this as args.files, because those are the file paths that we want to store, right? Those are the exact file paths. Mode of w should do the trick. We have to also pass the archive name, and it should be accessible via args. So let's say this should be args.archive name. Okay, and this should be now args.archive name, and let's also parse the arguments itself. So we'll say our args is basically parser dot parse args, which basically, render whatever arguments we have defined, and grab all of it in this, and then we can access those as attributes. So let's try to run it, and this should obviously not work, right? Because we haven't given any of the command line arguments. So let's say I want to name my zip file as my folder.zip. I want to give files, and one of the file I want to give is leadspeak1337.py. Let's execute it, and it seems like it worked, right? It said that okay, zip archive, this has been created, and it basically displayed that particular information. So now we can add a couple of things in it. Like for example, if we didn't get any command line arguments, it didn't complain, right? And the program crashed. So that is kind of annoying. So we should give helpful error to the user, and at any point of time our program shouldn't crash like that. So let's say if not args.archive name or args.files, so we'll check if any of those is empty. We'll just give sys.exit, and we'll print it out. No command line arguments supplied. Please check the help section for relevant information. So now let's try to run it, and we'll say Python, and then let's say we want to run Zipster. So it already says that okay, you have to use some command line arguments, right? This is perfect. At least it's not crashing on the first go. So let's try to execute help, and if you press -h, it automatically says that this is Zipster, which is zip CLI utility. It has optional arguments. Zip archive name is one of those, files is the other one of those, right? And view is other one of those. So let's modify this. Display information about uncompressed and compressed file size, right? So this is what we wanted. Yeah, so here we go, right? Now one more thing that you can do is, for example, if I try to run the command saying that this is my zip folder name and these are the files, what I can do essentially is I can provide a name of the zip file folder which is already existing in my directory, right? And this program doesn't obey or doesn't respect that there is already a file present with that name. So I don't want to accidentally write any of the folder that is already present. I can lose my data that way, right? So it is always a good technique to always check if the particular folder already exists, and if it exists, give a warning to the user. Take an input from the user that we have detected that there is already a zip archive with that particular name. Are you sure you want to override that? And if they say that okay, yes, I am sure, I want to override that, at that point of time we are pretty sure that we should run our program. If they say no, they don't want to do it, then the program shouldn't do anything, right? And it should give them another chance to input another archive name, right? So now let's say if args.view, then only display the things, and let's give this as false, right? So it didn't give us the information. If I do a -v, it should give me the information around the uncompressed file size and the compressed file size. So all of this is great now, but we want to see if the archive name is already existing in our directory, right? So let's check that. So we'll say args archive name is in the directory which is let's list the current directory. So we'll do a list dir on the current directory itself, and if we have that particular archive name existing, let's take the choice from the user, right? And let's say the archive name that you have provided already exists. Do you want to replace it, right? And now we can switch on the choice, and we can say that okay, if choice is yes, or let's just test it out for no. So we say if the choice is no, we will say zip archive not created, please input the correct archive name again, and then we can do a sys exit of 1. Remember that 0 here will be a successful exit, a non-zero number is an unsuccessful exit. So that is what we are implying here in both of the commands, right? We are saying that the program was unsuccessful in whatever it wanted to do. So that's it. So let's try it out, right? So we'll say this, and see, it gives us the error, right? It says that do you want to continue, no matter whatever, like if I type h, it would still go ahead and create it until unless I say no, right? So it goes ahead and creates the file, right? If I do a y, it will go ahead and create the file. Just when I say no, I don't want to create it, that is when it says that okay, zip archive not created, please input the correct archive name again, right? So we can improve over that. So we can say until unless the choice is n, we or in y, we don't want to do anything with it. So let's do that, right? So let's say while choice is not in let's say if it is not either in yes or no, we will keep on iterating and take the input from the user, right? And then we will just check for the no one, because if this particular statement doesn't execute, we are pretty sure that this one will execute, right? It will just get out of those lines. All right, so now let's try it out. I'll just clear the screen, and now it says do you want to execute it? If I say yes, it works, right? If I say no, it doesn't work. If I say h or j or whatever, it will keep popping that okay, you should give me a correct output, right? So I say no, and it says okay, we are pretty much done here, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we didn't need setlib at all, so I'm gonna get rid of that, and I will just format this code and then upload it to the GitHub repository that we talked about, and you can pick it up from there, learn, tweak around, and see how things work. If you have any questions, please feel free to mention it in the comment section below. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys liked these videos. These are helpful for you, and if you include these kind of projects in your resume, it will definitely boost up your resume. And yeah, I hope you had pretty much fun, and I'll see you in the next one.